So today's session is all about the very crucial for organizations to protect the privileged accounts so that they can ultimately protect their important systems and sensitive data. And that's what we are going to talk about in this session. Now, before we move forward, let me tell you something about us. We, InfosecTrain, we have started back in 2016 with core focus on security and uh, cloud-based trainings, right? We are a consulting firm as well. We have a wide range of courses available with very experienced, very qualified trainers who are certified on their respective products, right? We have done a lot of corporate trainings in past few years. As you see in the screen, we have all these corporate clients that really trust us. Uh, why InfoSec Train? No, we prepare the training, at least for this particular course, we have designed the course in such a way that that replicates a real-time environment, right? So anyone who is joining an organization as a PAM engineer or as a different profile, right? Any tool or any particular technology, the tasks that you are responsible to do, those kind of tasks are replicated in this training. So we prepare you for live scenarios, right? Actual scenarios that you'll have to face in a real-time job. And that's why the trainings are tailor made specifically to the product you are learning and specifically to the challenges that you're going to face when you're working in a real-time environment, right? We provide post-training completion, we provide certification assistance, as in the approach that you need to take in order to clear the certification examinations, right? Flexible mode of the trainings are usually scheduled at a particular time, which is accessible for everyone. And recorded sessions and study materials are going to be there, right? Okay, agenda of this particular webinar, we are going to try and understand the privileged access security as a whole. Why do we need it, right? What are the risks associated when you create a privileged account? What can go wrong if you do not secure a privileged account? And what are the standard expectation from a privileged access security solution? If you're investing in a privileged access security solution, uh, how do you expect it to provide a value to your environment? How do you expect it to provide a secure environment for your privileged accounts, right? We are going to talk about course content as well, and if the time permits, we'll take the questions and answers at the end of the session. Okay, let's talk about privileged access. So a few minutes ago, we were talking about the important assets, and any kind of modification on the system has to be done through an account that has higher capabilities, right? So like the term suggests, privileged access is basically any account that has higher abilities, higher capabilities than a standard normal user account, right? If the account has access to multiple systems, if the account has higher ability, as in ability permissions to modify something on the system level, install software, um, copy or remove files, delete files, right? Create users, do any kind of modifications, push policies, any kind of modifications. If the account has ability to do so, the account will be considered as a privileged account. Idea behind creating a privileged account is usually for maintenance work, right? For example, let's say if a company has large number of Windows systems, right? Windows servers, there has to be someone who will be performing regular maintenance of the server, checking that if the servers are running as expected, uh, the CPU utilization is good, disk space is good, uh, doing maintenance, regular patchings, installation, user creation. If someone needs access, that access needs to be provided. So all those administration work, maintenance work has to be done by a particular team or by a particular individual. And in order to perform these maintenance work, high abilities, higher permissions within the systems are required. If you are doing some modification, you need a higher privilege, right? So the privileged accounts are usually created for maintenance work, right? That needs higher permissions. So basically every single device within the organization is going to have a privileged accounts created, right? You talk about Windows system, there is local administrators. We might have worked with Unix systems. There are root accounts, right? As such, shadow users. Talk about network devices, right? There is sysadmin accounts, database sysadmin accounts, right? Every single device, every single operating system or application is going to have its own privileged account that the respective admin will use to do the maintenance work, right? These privileged accounts have very high capabilities and can be used to perform any kind of modifications, any kind of uh, installations, any kind of policy and change, or any kind of password change, user creation, right? Basically, it has access to the entire device. So if this particular type of account gets stolen, it creates a risk for your systems, right? That's why these accounts are very sensitive and needs to be protected. Now, when we talk about privileged accounts, there are two types of privileged accounts. Um, Two types of privileged accounts that you will come across when you are working um, in an environment, right? First one is interactive or human accounts. Human accounts are usually the accounts that are um, used by individuals for interactive logins or manual logins. For example, let's say if you want to log into a system, how do you log in? You have to provide the user ID and the password, and you type it manually, right? So in a way, you are interacting with the account that you're using to gain access to the system, right? If any password change is required, you're going to do it yourself, or if any permission elevation is required, you're going to do it yourself, right? These type of accounts that you use to log into the system manually by typing in the username and password, or interacting with the account in any way, these are called interactive accounts or human accounts because they are frequently used by humans. Most common example of interactive accounts are super user accounts. Super user accounts are accounts that has the highest permission within a particular system, right? That's why it's called super user. You cannot have any account that has higher capabilities than this particular super user account. And every system created within the IT infrastructure is going to have a super user account. Like I said, it's usually used for maintenance work. You need to um, do software installation, need to push policies, need to perform patching, or in extreme cases, need to decommission the server. You'll need an account that has the highest capabilities, right? So every system is going to have a higher privileged account, a high critical super user account. Most common example, if you use Unix, there is a root account, Windows local administrator. For database, you have sysadmins. And for Active Directory systems, you have domain administrator account. How many of you know what Active Directory is? So Active Directory is basically a domain service. Now, in simple words, it's a directory of the entire organization, right? Like you have a phone directory which contains the phone number for the people living in the city, right? Similarly, Active Directory is a directory of all the individuals, all the systems present within the company's IT environment, right? Active Directory is centralized repository that contains the information of all the employees, their digital identity, their all the attributes that are associated with their identity, for example, email, name, phone numbers, all of that, right? Sorry. And apart from that, all the systems that are created within the company's environment. So all the servers, all the user laptops, workstations, everything, right? You have a vast centralized directory that contains all the information of all the resources present within the company's environment. Now, sometimes to maintain all these resources, to make sure that the right policies are pushed into all the systems, right users are being created, password resets are being done, support is being provided, you need a dedicated centralized admins who can do this kind of work, right? So they need to have administrative capabilities within the Active Directory repository, right? And that's what we call domain admin accounts. Any account that allows these administrators to modify anything on the Active Directory repository or Active Directory domain, right? So it's like a super user on your Active Directory environment. All these are example of super user account or interactive accounts because they are being used by humans or some individual to log into the systems manually by typing in the password or by interacting with the account. But that's not the case with non-human interact accounts or non-interactive accounts. These accounts are usually used by machines, right? Machines, in our case, in a particular IT environment, we could call it scripts, right? Scripts or applications, backend applications. So what happens usually is sometimes companies will have scripts that needs to be pushed into multiple systems, right? Multiple systems. Uh, let's say 100 systems, and in a very less amount of time and very frequently, right? Let's take an example of a PowerShell script that needs to be pushed every 2 minutes to hundreds of systems, right? But how does the script logs into the system in order to push its functionality? Needs to type in a username and password to log into the system. It's not possible through uh, manual interactive logins because you cannot expect someone to type in the password 100 times in 2 minutes, right? And that is a very common use case that every development has to face, every application development has to face. So this is where they use hard-coded credential, right? Which means they are typing in the username and the password within the script itself, and the script initiates an automatic login sequence to different systems, automatically reads the username and password and logs into the systems in order to push its functionality, right? So username and password written in plain text within our application code are called hard-coded credentials. They are example of non-human accounts because they are not being used by humans. They are being used by machines or scripts. Same goes for service account. If you have heard of service accounts, uh, okay, I'm not able to navigate out of the presentation. I'll probably talk about service accounts later. But just to give you a brief idea, services are usually a certain set of tasks that are performed automatically on behalf of any application or any software, right? You might have interacted with the service in your particular IT environment. Whenever you install a software on a server, that software, that application needs to perform certain tasks automatically. That will create an automatic scheduled task or service within the system, local service within the system. That service will be run, will be, it will be scheduled to run on a periodic basis. Let's say every 1 hour or every 2 hours, this particular task will be run automatically. Now, sometimes these softwares, these applications might need to extend their functionality to multiple systems. And in that case, they have to initiate a logon to multiple systems. And that is where they type in the username and password within the services itself so that the service account automatically initiates the connection to different systems and perform their task, right? So another example of non-interactive account, right? Non-human or non-interactive accounts. And we'll talk about this in very detail in probably the live sessions. But the difference between interactive and non-interactive accounts is the interactive accounts are used by humans and non-interactive accounts are used by applications and scripts automatically, no intervention of any humans or any individual No manual intervention is required, right? Now, both of these type of accounts are privileged accounts. They are sensitive accounts. But when you implement a privileged access security solution, right, when you design the implementation phases of the privileged access security in a running environment, the first priority is always going to be the interactive privileged accounts. Why? Because these type of accounts are usually the high critical accounts, very high privileged super user accounts. And the problem with these accounts is that these accounts are being used by individuals to log into the systems manually, right? These accounts are used by individuals to log into the system manually. That means they are typing in the username and password. That means the passwords are exposed to them, right? So it becomes a very high risk when you expose the password to all the stuff. And ultimately, that might lead to exposure of the passwords, which we will talk about in detail in upcoming sessions. But these type of accounts that are exposed to the teams are very high risk, and that's why the priority is interactive privileged accounts, right? Non-human accounts are equally sensitive, but they are not as exposed as interactive accounts. So they are the second priority and usually are being taken care in the phase 2 of the privileged access security implementation, right? Now, different tools have different mechanisms to um, secure non-interactive accounts. CyberArk has a different solution called Application Access Manager, which we will talk about, but the core focus will be interactive privileged accounts. All right, let's talk about the risk associated with the privileged account. Why do we need to secure the privileged account, right? What happens if we do not protect the privileged accounts, and why companies these days are aggressively looking to implement a PAM solution? PAM means privileged access management, right? Three problems, real-time scenarios. Let's talk about three real-time scenarios. First one, they are very high critical accounts, right? Have access to large number of systems and can be compromised easily in order to gain access to vast amount of data within the company, right? Let's take an example of this Active Directory domain admin account, right? This Active Directory domain admin account is an account that has permission to all the resources created within your Active Directory, right? All the resources created within your Active Directory. Let's say if you're a large corporation, you'll have thousands of servers, you'll have thousands of users, right? And every information being stored on Active Directory, and one single account, one Active Directory account has permission to access all those data, right? Can log into every single system with one set of user ID and password, right? One set of user ID and password can be used to log into thousands of systems. And not only log in, this account is an admin account, so it will have administrative capability on every single system within the company, right? Every single system. So it can be used to log into the systems and do all kinds of modification, right? Remove data, remove users, change policies, do any kind of stuff, right? Let's say if this particular account gets compromised, your entire systems gets compromised, right? You don't have a way to protect them. If one single set of credential gets in wrong hands, it can jeopardize the security of all the systems within the company, right? And it's not like you have one or two Active Directory domain admin accounts that you can just keep it in a secure location and protect it. Because domain admin accounts are going to be created for every member of your Active Directory support team, right? Every support desk engineer is going to have a domain admin account. Why? Because everyone needs to have handle different tasks, right? If it's a large corporation, someone will be handling policies, someone will be handling user creation, someone will be having handling user issues, right? A lot of tasks that needs domain administrator account. So in a typical organization, you'll at least see 15 to 20 domain admin accounts. That is very common. Any one of those accounts gets compromised, the entire environment is compromised, right? So this basically acts as a keys to your entire kingdom. You do not want to leave these type of accounts unprotected, right? This needs to be secured in very detailed manner, very efficiently, right? And there has to be a very great control on the use of every Active Directory domain admin accounts, right? Needs to be audited very well. Second, there has to be a centralized repository for all the privileged accounts within the environment, right? Domain admins are not only privileged accounts. They are very high sensitive privileged accounts, but they are not the only privileged accounts. There are a lot of privileged accounts created on application level, if not on Active Directory, right? Every system applications like database or even local systems like servers, Unix servers, Windows server are going to have their own privileged accounts, own super user accounts, right? And every super user accounts, irrespective of what systems they are created on, needs to be heavily monitored. It's to be very heavily monitored, right? And audited. Who is using it? What are they doing? Right? Once they are logged in, what activities are being performed? Right? Who have access to the accounts? If they are authorized to use the account, all these parameter needs to be monitored constantly, right? And that's why companies hire auditors, okay, just to keep track of things, just to make sure that uh, the policies that are defined on an organization level are being strictly followed, and if they are not being followed, needs to be reported, right? That's why companies hire auditors. But it becomes very difficult for auditors to do their job when privileged accounts are distributed. And when I say distributed, I mean they are created on different systems and used by different people. And there is no centralized repository for the privileged account. There is no centralized record, right? So the auditor's job becomes very difficult. I'll give you an example. Let's say you are part of a database team, right? And in order you want to implement another instance of your database, and for that you need a server, right? So usually how it goes, you raise a request to the server team, server support, to create a server for you, right? They create a server, but along with the server, they create a local super user account on the server that they will use to perform maintenance work later on, right? Doing patching, doing policies, all those kind of stuff, right? So server team created the server, created super user account that they kept for themselves, which they'll use for future purposes. Handed over the server to the database admin. The database admin installs the database on the server and creates an account on the database, right? Account that they will use to maintain the database now hosted on the server, right? Modifying the instances, doing all kind of database work, right? So now we have two privileged accounts created on one single server, and these privileged accounts are being managed at different places, right? Server team has a super user account and the database team has a database admin account, right? On the same server, we have two layers and privileged accounts are being created on different layers being handled by different people, right? Who is using them? What tasks are being performed, right? And if this is the process that you follow, right? Privileged accounts are being handled by two different places or by two different individuals in two different places. This is the process you follow, and it's going to be the case with all your systems, right? So let's say if you have thousands of servers, privileged accounts are being created by different individuals and are being managed at different places, right? Auditor wants to track the activities of the privileged account. They go to server team to retrieve the activities of super user account. They go to database team to retrieve the activities of database account. They go to application team to retrieve the activities of application account. Too much hassle, right? Too much complication and very high chances that auditors might miss out on important details. And this is where the privileged access security solution could help. So what a privileged access security solutions like CyberArk or Beyond Trust does for you is it provides a repository, a central repository where all privileged accounts can be stored and secured with high level of encryption. We'll talk about how does it secures the privileged accounts and information, but provides a central repository, allows all types of privileged accounts to be hosted irrespective of what systems they are created on, right? And once the privileged accounts are hosted in one central repository, the users are always directed to use the PAM console or the privileged access security console to list the account uh, which they want to use and then use it to perform any kind of task, right? So if I want to use the super user account, I cannot just use the username and password. The password is kept in the PAM repository. And if I want to use the super user account, I'll have to log into the privileged access console, authenticate myself, right? This is how it's going to work. Sorry. So let's consider this as a PAM console, right? Privileged access management repository. All privileged accounts are secured in this particular place, right? So Windows super user, Active Directory domain accounts, right? And whatever accounts, database accounts, any user who wants to use any sensitive accounts, they'll have to authenticate themselves in the PAM solution first. They'll have to provide the user ID and password, authenticate themselves, and this user ID is usually the ID that they use to log into the laptop, right? So that ID is kept by the users themselves, right? So let's say if Sanjeev wants to use a particular privileged account, uh, they'll have to log into the console, and from the console, once they are able to authenticate, they'll be able to see the accounts they want to use, and then they will be able to use the account to connect to the systems that they want, right? So in this particular case, the PAM solution is tracking which user is using what account to log into what server, at what time the connection was initiated, and once the connection was initiated, what task was performed by the by this particular user, right? So every activity in the organization that happens through the privileged accounts are being tracked, are being monitored. And the PAM solution is going to generate a detailed text log for the auditors saying that this user has used this account at this time to log into this system, right? So for all the privileged accounts are hosted in a central repository, users are being asked to log into that repository if they want to use sensitive account. They cannot just have access to the password and log in and do all kind of work, right? Every activity has to go through PAM, and the PAM console, privileged access management console, will generate a log saying that this user has performed this, has used this account at this time to log into this system and perform this kind of task. Becomes a whole lot easier for the auditors. They can just go to the PAM console and have access to all the logs in one single place, right? They can audit any users, any activities that has happened through privileged account. So the PAM solution makes the auditing very, very easy and ensures that no important details are missed out related to the privileged accounts activities. Make sense? All right. Third one, accountability has to be there, right? So if you are using a privileged account, there has to be a proper trail, proper activity logs, right? Let's say if I know the password of a particular account, an ID and password, administrator account or a domain admin account, I'll just initiate a remote desktop connection here, right? Just initiate a remote desktop console and write the name of the server. Click on the connect button, right? And it's going to ask me to provide the username and password. I'll just provide the administrator username and password, right? I know the password of a domain admin account. I'll just provide the domain admin account username and password. Get myself connected to the system where I want to connect. Now, when I'm connected to the system, I'm logged in as an administrator, right? So all the activities that I perform, let's say if I delete some files or I shared some files with someone who is not supposed to see it, any task that I was not authorized to do or I was not supposed to do, I perform those tasks. Who is going to know that Sanjeev has done it, right? Because the logs are going to say that activity was performed by administrator. All the server logs are going to say that the activity was performed by administrator because I use the administrator account to log into the system, right? Unless you track my IP address, it's not really possible to associate those activities with my ID, right? So even if I'm using the most critical accounts within the organization, I can perform any task I want and I can get away with it, right? This becomes a very high risk. If the passwords are exposed, direct connections to the systems can be made and there is no track, there is no accountability on the task being performed, even if you are using the most critical account, right? Now, this is where the solutions like privileged access security or solutions like CyberArk or Beyond Trust or any other PAM solutions can help, right? As soon as the accounts are onboarded to the CyberArk console or the PAM console, the passwords will be immediately rotated. So as a user, I would not have passwords anymore. In order to log into the system, I'll need the password, right? But I don't have the password anymore. And it's going to ask me for the password. The password is not there. Password is kept secured in the PAM console. Now, if I need the password, I'll have to log into the PAM console first, right? Authenticate myself so that the tool knows that it is me who is trying to access the account. And once I access the account and initiate the connection to the system, right? Once I access the account and initiate a connection to the system, every single activity that I do is being monitored, right? So let's say if I open a notepad window or if I open a control panel window, the CyberArk is going to say that Sanjeev has used this account to log into this server at this time, initiated control panel at this time, initiated notepad at this time, right? So it ensures complete accountability. If an individual is using a particular privileged account, performing some activities using the sensitive account, they will be held accountable for their actions, right? They cannot just use the password of the sensitive account, do anything and get away with it, right? So uh, the activities will be monitored at an individual level, and that's how you ensure accountability for every single activities, right? Apart from that, it also ensures the compliance related to the particular industry. If you have worked with banking domain or insurance domain, you might have heard of SOX compliance or payment card interface compliance, right? These are regulatory bodies that has certain standards that needs to be followed by every organization working in that industry. And if the rules are not being followed, the company uh, gets a fine by these regulatory bodies, right? The fines are imposed and usually they are pretty hefty. So that's one of the reasons that companies ensures that the privileged accounts are secured, uh, right? With all the tools and all the policies, all the mechanisms in place. So that's what that's where the privileged account security can be helpful, right? Provides a security to your most critical assets, your privileged accounts, ensures that there is a centralized repository for audits to be more efficient, and ensures that there is a access control and accountability for every individual that is using the privileged account. Right? Expectations from a privileged access security solution. If you are investing so much in a privileged access security solution, how do you think it's going to provide a value to the infrastructure? How do you think it's going to provide secure environment for your privileged accounts? Let's talk about some standard expectations for every privileged accounts, right? Standard expectations, every privileged account security. First one, ability to rotate the privileged accounts, right? The password of the privileged account. So static passwords are never a good idea, right? They are bound to get exposed after a certain point of time, right? Static passwords, never a good idea. Sorry. So usually companies would want the passwords, at least for their high privileged accounts, they would want the passwords to be rotated every 30 days or every 60 days. But the challenge is that they'll have thousands of servers and every systems will have at least one or two privileged accounts. So there will be 2,000, 3,000 privileged accounts. Rotating them manually is not not a easy task for the support team. A lot of manual efforts and a lot of time required. Now this is where in a PAM solution, in a privileged access security solution, you can define the time period, the periodic rotation time period. You can define a policy saying that every 30 days or every 60 days the password needs to be rotated, and the solution would automatically take care of that, right? It will automatically execute the password changes for all your privileged accounts. You just have to define the policies. You can even define complexities related to the password, complexity as in what would be the length of the passwords, or does it contain any special character or any digits. So all of that can be defined on a solution level, right? Access control has to be there. Access control as in least privileged method is a very minimum validity period of policy. Um, I mean, you can define anything, Shashi, yeah, starting from 30 days, 60 days, whatever rotation period is. Uh, so your company has to take a decision on what is the rotation period that they want. So let's say 30 days, you can just define that in the tool. Okay. Least privileged method is a standard that you need to implement uh, for every type of application access or system access. Least privileged method means providing only the permissions that are required for the individual to complete their task and to do their job. So take an example, right? So let's say if you have a developer who just need to log into the system and perform some file changes or code changes, then he needs to log off. Does not need to install any software, does not need to make any system level change or policy level change. Does not need access to the administrator account, right? You can just create a read-only account for them and provide access that way. So high privilege only needs to be provided if there is a requirement for it, right? And that needs to be audited very carefully. If an individual does not require a certain access, he should not have it, right? You need to implement the least privilege principle, and this is a basic security guide for any IT infrastructure. Least privilege method has to be implemented in order to provide access, and that is where privileged access security is going to help you, right? A lot of safe access control mechanisms which we will talk about in upcoming sessions, but this is something that the PAM helps you to achieve. Audit trails, like we talked about the audit process in CyberArk, all privileged accounts will be hosted centralized repository, and any activity that needs to happen through the privileged access security has to go through the PAM. They have to go through the PAM console in order to uh, use the account and perform any kind of activity, right? So as soon as they use the privileged account hosted in the PAM tool, it will generate a detailed log saying that this user has used this account to connect to this system at this point. These are the activities that were performed. So it generates complete audit trails, right? Tracking every activities. So comprehensive logs, session recordings, every sessions that are being initiated using a privileged accounts are recorded in video format, right? Keystroke logins, as in if you are logged into a high privilege uh, command line interface, any command that you execute that is called keystroke will be monitored, right? It will generate a text log saying that at this point this command was executed. Multi-factor authentication, we know what multi-factor authentication is. Basically another layer of authentication in your uh, login process. So it's not only username and password you'll have to type in, it's basically another factor of authentication that the user has to go through. Most common example, your banking websites, when you log into them, it's not only username and password, you'll have to provide an OTP or probably any other authentication mechanism, right? Helps in avoiding user impersonation. Nobody can steal your credential and get access to the data and the resources that you have access to. You'll also have to go through multi-factor authentication before they reach there, right? Session management, it's going to manage the sessions, as in record, monitor, and audit the sessions that are being initiated through a powerful privileged accounts, right? So all privileged accounts hosted in CyberArk or PAM, users who wants to use them, they'll have to uh, log into CyberArk and retrieve the account or initiate the connection through PAM tool, and that particular session will be monitored and recorded, will be saved later for auditors to see. So this will ensure that auditor have visibility on every single activities that are being performed using the privileged accounts, right? So they'll have very high control and the auditing will be very efficient. Just in time or temporary access, if someone does not need access for a longer period or does not need permanent access, the PAM tool will have features where they can define the time frame when they need access, what kind of permissions do they want. The access request will go through proper approval channels, and once the request is approved, accesses will be automatically granted on a temporary basis based on the time period defined. And as soon as that time period expires, the access is going to be deprovisioned automatically, right? So combining all these features that we are talking about, it creates an end-to-end privileged access security solution, right? Protecting the passwords, rotating them frequently, encrypting them so that they are not exposed anymore, auditing the use of these sensitive passwords, who is using it, at what time they are using it, what activities are being performed, uh, generating a whole lot of logs and video recordings just to keep it as evidence, right? In case anything goes wrong, complete audit trails so that process can be tracked regularly and improvements can be made in terms of security, right? Multi-factor authentication, as in no impersonations can be done, authentication is secure, right? And temporary access, least privileged method. So combining all these features creates end-to-end privileged access security. And in the course level, we'll also see the workflows of how things work. And these are just expectations from any standard privileged access security solution, right? We'll also see how different tool approaches these expectations, how CyberArk approaches these expectations, right? Uh, what are the risk? We have seen the risk that are associated, how the CyberArk as a privileged access security tool can mitigate the risk for you. With the topics that we have discussed so far, any doubts or anything that you want to talk about? Okay, we have a question on the chat window. Is spam usually automated or can be further automated? There is always scope for automation in any tool, right? There is always a scope for improvement, right? It has been automated up to large extent. For example, the password rotations are automated, the access provisioning has been automated, the onboarding of privileged accounts, discovery has been automated, but there are a lot of areas which might use some automations, and it depends on organization to organization depending on their use cases, right? Can you tell about keystroke again? Yes, Haripriya, the keystroke is basically any high privileged command that are being executed on a command line interface. For example, in Linux systems, you are executing commands like add user, right? Adding user, or change in any file system. Those commands are called keystrokes, and that will be recorded by PAM systems. Is there any TCP UDP protocol used for PAM? Yes. If the tool wants to talk to any other third party solution implemented within the company, for example, if the PAM solution, or let's say CyberArk, wants to talk to SIEM tools, right, for log analysis, it will use the TCP protocols, right? If it wants to talk to the SMTP or um, monitoring agent for that matter, any communication will to any external resources will happen through TCP UDP protocol.